In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill,
At the dawn of the 20th century, China was faced with many issues, both domestic and foreign. In 1911, a revolution toppled the age-old Qing dynasty led by American-educated Sun Yat-sen and his nationalist Kuomintang party. Chaos soon followed, however, as Sun turned the country over to top military commander, who in turn crowned himself emperor. China disintegrated into fragments as warlords declared independence from the self-appointed dictator. Hope briefly reared its head as the Kuomintang reasserted itself under the
Mr. Patton!
What, Wyatt? What?
Mr. Patton, I gotta ask you. You got half the class asleep, the other half is on their phone. God knows what the kid in the front is doing. Could you give us something relevant to wake us up here? Sweet mother of Stalin's beard, what is that?
Chinese citizens are heavily censored in what they can and cannot say, despite the fact they technically have freedom of speech. To prevent information the government doesn't want being spread, anything China's government does not approve of, they censor by claiming that it exposes state secrets and endangers the country, or by simply not providing a reason. Chinese government censors content to keep Chinese people from learning of foreign ideas and historical flaws that may create unrest within the country. Some Chinese may practice free speech at home or with other trusted people, but may disappear if they were to do it in a public forum or in front of government officials. China has had a history of condemning free speech. On June 4, 1989, unarmed protesters located in Tiananmen Square were gunned down by tanks and soldiers. The death toll is estimated between hundreds and thousands.
In May of 2016, U.S. fighter jets were too close for comfort to the shore of China. This was the latest flare-up between the U.S. and China. On September 22nd, Xi Jinping, the premier of China, remarked that, quote, "There is no such thing as a so-called Thucydides trap in the world." The Thucydides trap refers to when a rising power causes fear in an established power which escalates toward war.
Xi continues to say, but should major countries time and again make the mistakes of strategic miscalculation, they might create such traps for themselves. Then 2 days later, Obama stated that he doesn't believe in a Thucydides trap or in the inevitability of war between the US and China. Instead, he formally announced that the United States welcomes the rise of China that is peaceful, stable, prosperous, and a responsible player in global affairs. Obama and Xi were quick to disavow the inevitability of war. Both feel that it is impossible for the United States and China to go to war. Extreme conflict with one another would be the start. However, we rely on one another to support our economy.
Beginning in the late 1970s, China's leaders set a new course for their country, which has turned China into a major world power with an economy second in size only to that of the United States. The man who launched China on its new path was Deng Xiaoping, the man in this picture. To encourage economic growth, the government, under Xiaoping, fostered free markets, competition, and private incentives. Families were allowed to increase the amount of land they could farm as private plots and sell what they grew on the open market. Industrial managers were given more control over the operations of businesses and grant the authority to hire and fire workers, award bonuses, and keep more of their business' profits for themselves. While encouraging economic reform, China continued to be a one-party state in which all major decisions were made by an inner circle of 25 to 30 officials. Elections at the local, provincial, and national level handpicked party members to be delegates to the People's Congress, which routinely and unanimously approved policies decided upon by their leaders. There was no effective mechanism for transferring power and no possibility of meaningful debate on public issues. Individuals who called for a fifth modernization were silenced when in 1986, many thousands of university students and others demonstrated in Hefei and elsewhere for greater democracy. The government arrested the movement's leaders and then imposed strict controls on the press. 3 years later, in 1989, the government faced a greater threat. Against a backdrop of inflation, housing shortages, continuing corruption, cutbacks in university funding, and general uncertainty about the country's future, pro-democracy demonstrations by university students in the Beijing area began in mid-April 1989 and soon spread to other cities. By mid-May, Beijing's Tiananmen Square was a tent city with 1 million inhabitants, including 3,000 hunger strikers. With the world looking on, discussions between government officials and student leaders broke down, and early efforts to clear the square by force proved ineffective. By the end of May, government hardliners led by Deng Xiaoping decided to crush the pro-democracy movement. On June 3rd, veteran units of the army entered Beijing and, after breaking through barricades erected throughout the city, cleared the square of a few remaining protesters by the morning of June 4th. At least several hundred, perhaps as many as 2,500 civilians were killed along with several dozen soldiers and police. On June 9th, Deng Xiaoping addressed a gathering of army officers in a speech that became required reading for officials throughout the land and became something of an official interpretation of 1989 pro-democracy movement. There would be no going back, no major changes. China, he said, must continue on its path to economic development, but there would be no fifth modernization.
Chinese culture since the 1980s has been modernizing. The ideology of youth and the change in government leadership towards a more modern China has raised the questions of whether China will rise to become the next world superpower. The youth of Chans today is driven towards career making. The youth strive to make money due to the new materialistic aspect of modern China. They desire to become a part of the new materialistic culture of China. These modernizations also stimulate China's economy. With the youth drive to obtain money and to spend it on new modern items creates a new
flow of money into China's market. This allows for more growth of the economy and more modernization. China's growing economy and the youth's change in perspective and mindset of culture shows China has potential to grow to become a world superpower. The youth of China also has a love for Western culture. Their culture is slowly merging with ours. This means that they will also start to look more and more like a superpower because our culture wouldn't be what it is today without the fact that the US is a superpower.
Over the last decade, China has experienced enormous economic growth. However, this has not been without a cost. China's pollution is already a problem today, and if their mass production increases anymore, there can be a serious consequence for the environment and the people living there. For example, the air pollution in China is so great the population is forced to wear masks to avoid disease and other problems the smog can cause. Live Science notes that air pollution in Beijing is emblematic of China's many environmental problems. China's environmental crises seem to arise on a scale as sweeping and epic as the vast nation itself. Water quality is also a critical problem in China. The per capita water supply is low for China is not a water-rich land, and not all have equal access to this water. According to one study conducted by the National Academy of Sciences, the water that does exist is unevenly distributed across China's massive landscape. In one particular appalling case, 6,000 dead pigs were found in the river that supplies water for the major city of Shanghai. As many have noted, China has experienced an economic miracle, but this miracle is not without costs.
Many think that China is becoming a major superpower. Little do they know that China is already the superpower, dominant above all other countries. According to Martin Jacques, by 2030 its economy will be twice the size of America's. It was once thought that we were the most dominant, successful country. However, that no longer applies, and it is thought that in 2 years, America's position in East China will grow even weaker. East China will become more and more China-centric, meaning it won't rely so much on America for support. China will be completely independent. This will be irreversible. Although China's economy is vast and continuously improving, their people's standard of living is less than adequate. The majority of the people live in poverty. This may seem detrimental to the country, but to them it isn't. No one in China aspires to be wealthy. While in 20 years, China's economy will be twice the size of ours, their standard of living will be only slightly over the half of the average American.
China has stubbornly held on to its own model of development, blending capitalism with authoritarianism. While other countries started developing Western ideas, institutions, languages, politics, religion, etc., China refused to conform. Now other countries are starting to look to China for new ways of development. Considering this, since China is becoming so exponentially powerful and successful without Western developments and ideas, can't we conclude that our ways no longer apply and maybe we could look for new ideas? The West is starting to flatline because we are incapable of looking to others for new ideas to improve our country. If China's ways have such an impression on countries like Africa, Latin America, East Asia, and Central Asia to Europe, then why are we too ignorant to try it as well?